So I will start until you will put the slides. So as Liana mentioned, we have amazing innovation here. You saw just few examples, but those gentlemen sitting on the stage, especially Tomer and Yoav, they have to deploy a lot of money every month. I always say that if 1% of the institutional investment money in Israel will be deployed into the Israeli biotech, it's a total game changer. And as a teaser for this panel, I brought only 2 slides. You can see here what is the difference between the different indexes. So we all know about the S&P 500. So if we look at 5 years, so it did nicely. It did 71%. The XBI, those of you that don't know, it's a weight ETF giving actually investors broad exposure to US biotech. And it went up by 14%. The Israeli biomed went down 56%. But then the next slide, if you go to the next slide and look at what happens in 1 year, you see a totally different situation. You see that the XBI actually performed better than the S&P 500 by far, 88% of increase at the biotech index in the US. You can also see that the Israeli biomed is not doing maybe as good as the Tel Aviv 35, but still doing 18%. So the discussion here is going to be about what will make institutional investors invest more in Israeli biotech, and I'm sure it will be a very interesting discussion. So, thank you for joining us, and I'll start by the order of sitting. It went nicely with the question. So, Yoav, first of all, give us a short introduction about yourself and what you do in the Phoenix, and also include what Phoenix is doing in terms of investment in the health tech space.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to kind of see you. It's very bright in here, so I'll try to assume that you're here. My name is Yoav Caspi. I'm a deputy CIO for long-term investments or pension, life insurance, those types of products at Phoenix. Phoenix, as you probably know, is the largest asset management company in Israel, both insurance, long-term savings of all different kinds. Overall, our AUM is over 600 billion shekel, and specifically, long-term savings is the biggest part of that. I've been at Phoenix for over a decade now. Most of my career have been involved in direct investing in equities, mostly globally. And today I sit at the allocation table. Essentially, I'm part of strategic decision making, allocating across different sectors, type of products, equity, debt, local, global, private, and listed. So that's on me. In terms of Phoenix in general, we've been investing in healthcare. Sorry, just one additional point, which probably is important. I also oversee our healthcare investing at Phoenix. So it's been a long-term, expensive hobby, I think, is how people refer to it here. In terms of what we do at Phoenix in healthcare, so I would essentially separate the discussion into public and private. In terms of public, we invest across regions. Majority of our investing in healthcare is in the US, as is typical, the largest markets. We've invested both in IPOs, pre-IPOs, secondary. We invest in biotech, although I have to say it's relatively a very small amount. In terms of private investments, those tend to be accompanied with what I would call experienced partners, so funds that are essentially leading innovative investments and kind of funds that we have long-term relationships with and have allocated to them in the past. And occasionally we will also co-invest with them, so go into a specific transaction with them. And I think those are kind of the two main components. We'll talk more in detail in a bit.
Thank you. And Tomer, a short introduction, and then the RL perspective on investment in biomed.
Sure. So thanks for having me. I'm Tomer Goldberg. I sit at Harel on a different capacity, so we call it basically our kind of alternative and strategic investments. But if you want to translate it into kind of human speak, is we do all the early stage investments across mostly technology, so across anything from kind of infrastructure, fintech, healthcare, and some of the other things. A few things about RL, one of the largest insurance companies in Israel, again, very large asset manager, like all the Israeli institutional investors. I'd say probably if you want to kind of think about allocation, I'd say probably 70% of assets are public, kind of equities in Israel and abroad, very similar, I guess, to what Yoav was describing. Bonds in Israel and abroad. 30% is kind of non-tradable securities that are kind of equally divided between private credit, real estate, and private equity venture capital. And I can describe our kind of healthcare investments in two buckets, right? One, if you think about kind of the broader private equity venture capital, so we're large sponsors of some of the major funds, mostly in the US, but in Europe as well. Some of them are in private equity, some of them are in venture. A lot of them would invest in healthcare, and we would typically come in as a co-investor. Those tend to be typically the larger kind of late stage deals. And what I do is mostly kind of focus on our early stage investments, mostly direct. So anything from kind of seed all the way to series, say B or C, where we could potentially lead the deal or come in and co-lead the deal across any of those categories. And I think, and Yoav said, expensive hobby. I tend to agree. I think a lot of the institutional investors have seen a lot of disappointment, specifically across kind of biotech but healthcare in general. And we could talk about why, and I think there's multiple reasons, but I think more and more, a lot of the institutional investors are kind of shying away from investing in mostly biotech.
So we will discuss it now
absolutely.
in this panel. Thank you. So Ricky, thank you for being with us. Ex-Morgan Stanley, you will tell about yourself, but you are the optimistic part, and I asked you to explain how institutional investors in the US make a lot of money from biotech, so please.
Sure. So just in terms of context, hi everyone. 25 years experience in healthcare, all in the US, in the intersection of finance and strategy. So spent 15 years at Morgan Stanley, ran their healthcare services and technology research franchise, and before that, a similar role at UBS for 10 years. So kind of when we think about Yoav and Tomer and I bring the perspective of the large institutional public market investors. So the Yoavs and more Yoav are, because you go across public counterparts, whether mutual funds or hedge funds, with a focus on healthcare. I'd say that when we think about sort of investing overall of healthcare, right? So there are three buckets. There's biotech, there's medtech, life sciences, and then there's healthcare services and technology, right? And each has different characteristics and different sort of investor profiles, different risk appetites. As we think about on the public side, and the private side is interesting for us because it's the pipeline. So we look to the private side to understand what's coming down the pipe on the public. But I would say ultimately on the public side, one, you have specialized investors, right? So you have, within the large mutual funds, you have dedicated healthcare investors dedicated to biotech, just as therapeutic versus sort of the other buckets. So they bring a lot of institutional knowledge around the marketplace. And second of all, usually you see companies that are later on in their life cycle. So if on the private side, you have companies that are could be sort of more in the research stage, preclinical, in order to go public, you have to be in the clinical side, and usually further advance to phase 1, right? So phase 2, phase 3, a bonus if you have already partnership with a strategic player, which is mostly sort of the pharma companies, because that would some sort of an indication to later on M&A opportunity. And I think to your question, right, what is so compelling about biotech investing for these? It's really sort of the upside optionality associated with M&A.
Okay, thank you. So Yoav, just to challenge you, and now because we have only 12 minutes, so we have to do fast answers. So just to challenge you, I know what Phoenix is investing in terms of the funds, and most of the funds that you are invested are investing mainly outside of Israel. We also discussed this. What will make Phoenix invest more in VCs or investment funds that will invest more in Israel? What is the key? What do we have to change in the Israeli health tech space?
Okay, we're starting with the hard question. So I think the answer is complicated. I was trying to think ahead of this panel what I would answer, but the truth is we need a real pathway. We need to see companies that can mature. So we've heard some interesting science startups. They're very exciting, and we also look at mature biotech companies that are listed. They're also exciting. How you bridge that gap is, to me, kind of a missing component of many companies that we see. A lot of the times it ends up being we see an idea, there is an unmet need, but me as an institutional representative of an institutional investor, it's really hard to bridge that gap from the idea to commercialization at the end. So I think if I have to pinpoint one shortcoming for local companies, it's the ability to show how you scale up dramatically, and it's many times it's more than just we're going to do the same in the US, because once you think about going globally, you need to have infrastructure of scientists and data and access to payers and commercialization and distribution and contact doctors, etc. The whole thing becomes much larger, and even the best ideas can become diluted. So long answer is credibly convince how you can come from point A to point B.
Thank you. Tomer, we met in the different junctions, and I know that you do early stage, also as you mentioned, but you mentioned something interesting. You mentioned that sometimes you invest through funds, but sometimes you go direct or you follow on other investment. Mm-hmm. If you can highlight what makes you decide on a certain investment that you are co-investing directly in a company compared to investing through a VC. What buys your heart to invest in a specific company?
So I'll give you, I hate investing in funds. So if I could invest directly, I'd always invest directly. I'm a direct investor. That's what I want to do. There needs to be a really good reason why we invest in funds. Again, our fiduciary duty is we manage, for the most part, it's others people's money, right? So my only concern is to make sure I bring the best product to market, whatever that product is. So if I need to invest, if I can invest directly, I'd rather invest directly. The places where I invest, and again, it's different where I sit on the alternative side of the house, and it's different in our investment division that typically do larger checks into funds, but it's always the idea of like, we need to look at this fund and understand why they're different, and what's the secret sauce and how they could win deals, kind of vis-a-vis some of the other opportunities in the market. I think the biggest, and I just want to kind of continue on the point Yoav made. I think one of the things that, and I think it's different. We talk about healthcare as one ecosystem, but it's actually maybe three or maybe even more. And I think there's different reasons when you look at biotech as a sector versus medical device versus healthcare. I think there's different reasons why we see less Israel institutional capital being deployed in each category. But I'll give you one example. In biotech, right, and I spend a lot of time thinking about biotech, and we do a lot of biotech deals directly. If you look at the science, kind of look at the Israeli science versus the science that's being done in, Cambridge, Massachusetts, or the UK, the Israeli science is on par, maybe sometimes better. So it's not a science problem. The quality of the science, the quality of the the stuff that are coming out from the Israeli universities is exceptional. I think, to me, the biggest problem is if you have two companies coming out with the same idea. One is starting in Tel Aviv, one is starting in Boston. The Boston company raises day zero $100 million from top-tier investors. The Israeli company, if they're lucky, will raise $5 to $7 million, and then maybe they'll raise 10 more, and then you start to see the difference. It has nothing to do with the science. It has everything to do with the amount of capital that's being deployed. And I think if that doesn't change, I think it's going to become really hard. So it's a question of what starts. I think for now, we don't have enough funds that are specializing and investing directly in Israel, and that's the kind of the starting point of the access to capital is where, at least for biotech, the Israeli ecosystem is hurting.
So this is actually the key,
But
because we have great science, but we don't have enough funds in the early stage. And I want to switch to Ricky. And in the US, it's the same problem. We have science, great science in the academia, but still there are hundreds of VCs investing in early stages, including institutional investors. They are doing a lot of money, eventually, in terms of the IRR. So, Ricky, from your perspective of the US and Israel, what do you think we have to do better in Israel to compete on this money of the institution?
Well, I think that Tomer sort of hit the nail on the head, right? Because when you think about specifically biotech investing, and we saw it in one of the earlier presentations here, there are two key areas, right? Regulatory environment, risk on, risk off, and then access to cash. And the reason access to cash is so critical is because you're talking about companies that for many, many years are going to be pre-revenue. And trials cost a lot of money, right? So you have to have access to cash in order to be able to get to data, right, to run the results. There was an earlier presenter who talked about biotech companies that are trading at below cash. That's basically the market is telling them, the institutional market is telling them that they don't think that they'll be able to raise money, right, before they get to that next endpoint. So you could have great science, but if you don't have sort of that cash in the balance sheet, you won't be able to do the trials at scale. So the point here, right, that when you think about Israeli biotechs, and again, it was the comparison of who's in Cambridge, right, versus who's here, is really how do you think about the ability of creating these relationships, right, around these kind of like hubs where you have large biotechs, where you have large pharma companies that will become one of your sort of strategic investors and infuse the cash that will then allow you to do the trials.
So now I get back to you, Yoav, and now we're really fast round. I think we are in consensus, great science, lack of funds, especially in the early stages. The government tried to do many incentives during the war and otherwise. What do you think, Yoav, can make you, as the representative of Phoenix, to invest more in early stage and to take higher risks in Israel? What kind of incentive do you want to see, or a structure?
I think it's so there's been some attempts locally here, right, with innovation funds and underwriting minimum thresholds for scientific-oriented investors and things of that nature. And in my view, they haven't been massively successful. And the main reason I would point is essentially the ecosphere is not, I would say, not deep enough locally, in the sense that So when I look at, I'll give just an example. When I look at investing in a listed biotech company in the US, many times I would look at the cap table, who's on it, and if I see some strategic investors whom I know and have been very successful in the space in the past, that gives me kind of an initial justification and motivation to continue searching. That doesn't mandate anything, but it's a good certificate. It's a first hurdle passage, essentially, which locally doesn't really happen most of the time. So I don't know how to specifically answer completely, but I would say it's a necessary condition, I think, to develop a bigger sphere of investors.
Tomer,
Here.
thank you.
I think so. I think what we need is, and it's something that the Israeli ecosystem has been lacking. We need only one or two success stories. Okay, I think we haven't had any major Israeli pharma success story. And again, I'm sorry we're talking about just biotech. I think we could talk about healthcare IT, and I think there's reason to be optimistic there. But we need one success story, one company that breeds the next generation of companies, the next set of managers who will take the company and who kind of will grow the ecosystem. And I think I think the optimistic part here is we only need one. And the reason we only need one is because most of the Israeli entrepreneurs, most of the Israeli biotech entrepreneurs don't have a success model where they have US success stories for sure, but there aren't enough really successful biotech entrepreneurs who've done it over and over again. Like you go to Boston and you have a set of, you go to like an Atlas Ventures, right? And they have a set of like 15 different CEOs and they could bring you as a executive chairman here. We don't have that, okay? So I think if again, I don't know if it's a government responsibility or if it's the public sector or the private sector who needs to take care of it. But in the end, if we have one success story, I think that would be what is needed to actually create an ecosystem here.
Okay, you have to finish with a positive note.
So I would say something. You know, Tomer said there's also really interesting opportunities in healthcare technology, but I think that an interesting area to focus is the idea that we're really seeing convergence, right? So we're seeing convergence of biotech, medtech, healthcare services, and that's really about technology, and Israel innovation, right, is the best at that. So I do think that it's also kind of like really thinking, let's kind of like think a little bit out of the box and think about how do we create those winners, tapping into what we're really, really good here, and really thinking about how does that align with the market. And with pharma services, with biotech and therapeutic, there's a real interest right now in the market in AI, right, in technology-based companies that can help accelerate drug development. So if you can take that and you marry it with biotech, you can have kind of like real winners. And I think that's a real opportunity for the marketplace here.
Thank you, Yoav, Tomer, and Ricky. Thank you for being with us and staying for lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.